Hello and welcome to Autistically Wired, a conversation series that highlights autistic people as professionals, creators, entrepreneurs, and community contributors. I'm Brooke, your interviewer for today's conversation. I'm a late diagnosed ADHD woman, an entrepreneur, an education professional, and it's really meaningful for me to be a part of these conversations and help create space for autistic voices to be heard and valued. This series centers what becomes possible when autistic people are supported in being our full authentic selves rather than focusing on deficits or barriers. These conversations are strengths based, flexible, and guided by each guest's communication style, pacing, and preferences. Today, I'm joined by Tad. Tad is a professional with a 25-year career that spanned help desk support, networking engineering, consulting, project management, and director level leadership. Over the course of his career, he built and led project teams, helped organizations transition to agile methodologies, and played a key role in designing large-scale technology infrastructure and organizational structures. Alongside his corporate work, Tad also ran a photography business, taught continuing education classes, and supported students as a teaching assistant, highlighting both his technical expertise and creative side. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and the insights he has to share. Tad, welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right, our first question. So you have shared that you didn't realize that you were autistic during your career. Can you walk us through when that understanding began for you and how it's changed the way you see your life, both past and present?
So I'm 53 now, and I retired early. But when about 5 years ago, and it was I think it was after I retired. But I I don't know if this is a function of the fact that I'm autistic or the fact I'm dyslexic, dyscalculic, and dysgraphic. So I don't know if it's a function of one of those things, but I have a lot of trouble sequencing things in time or sequencing things in general. I can't do the months. I can't say the months in order. I have to look at something in order to get things in order. So I've explained it to my wife, all my memories are just jumbled up chronologically in my head. Like I might be telling a story and I'll be like, a month ago, and my wife will be like, baby, that's just 2 weeks ago, or something like that. So I think it was about 5 years ago, 2021. I think it was during the pandemic. When I was talking to a friend of mine who is a psychologist, and she, as part of her practice, she does autism assessments for children. And in the core, we were talking about music theory. I was explaining, I was explaining some aspect of music theory to her. And she said, as your friend, it would be unethical for me to diagnose you, and plus you're not my client demographic and everything. But have you ever thought about exploring whether or not you might be autistic? And that was that was the first time I'd ever thought about that possibility. And so I started down that rabbit hole that so many other autistic people find themselves falling into, right? Like watching YouTube video after YouTube video, taking online quiz after online quiz, just reading and quietly joining online autism communities and just lurking and listening to what other people have to say and everything else. So, and after a while, I came to the realization that, oh my God, this explains so much of my life. I'm still today trying to decide if I want to actually pursue an actual diagnosis. I'm 53 years old. I'm retired. I don't need like the diagnosis to go into HR and ask for accommodations. So is it worth the expense and the emotional journey of getting a diagnosis just to validate, what has become so patently obvious in my life? So, but in terms of how it's changed the way that I see my life, both past and present, that's a whole spectrum and jumble and mess of emotions. There's so much relief, like, oh my God, I'm not broken after all. My brain works differently. There's a lot of sadness because there's so many times in my life where things should have gone differently. And if I'd known that I were autistic at the time, or if the people around me had known it, my life would have had a completely different trajectory. There's a lot of anger. There's anger that I missed out on so many opportunities, that I spent my entire adult working life. I spent decades in a constant state of burnout. Not even having enough, emotional energy to devote to. I mean, I didn't touch a guitar for, I don't know, decades. I didn't even own a guitar for a long period of time. I didn't touch a piano keyboard, or I didn't. Photography, which had been a passion my entire life, took a back burner for years. Because I didn't have the emotional capacity, the emotional energy to be able to do it. I barely had enough. Around year 7 of my marriage, we had a really horrible, rough year because I would spend all my emotional energy at work. And then I thought that networking and being social and going out for work functions and after work drinks or whatever, and I don't drink alcohol, but after work activities and stuff, that I thought that was the way that you got ahead in your career. And I was so hell bent on having this incredible corporate career and making such a great life for me and my wife, and that I would spend all my emotional energy there, and then I'd come home and I'd just sit in front of a computer zoning out, or sitting in front of the TV zoning out, not having enough emotional energy to interact with my wife. And that took a massive toll on our marriage. And we were thankfully able to work through it. And, we're still happily married 26 years later, but it was hard. It was horrible. It was, and so I'm so angry that I spent so much of my life masking that hard and trying to be normal, when I could have given myself accommodations, given myself permission not to work that hard, or pursued an entirely different career that wasn't at such odds with the way my brain works. Yeah, I'm good at IT. Yes, I'm good at building and leading teams. I'm good at hiring and interviewing and hiring people. I'm good at designing organizational structures. I'm good at these things, in part because of, I think, my autistic brain. But the cost was, being good at something isn't the same as truly finding joy and fulfillment in what you do and in your life, right? And I would be happy for periods of time, generally when I was just starting a new job or starting with a new company, since it was still pretty much the same job that I had been doing, but starting with a new company, and I'm thinking about all the possibilities and all the wonderful opportunities ahead of me, and then burning out all over again. So, in terms, there's just, it's such a jumble. And looking forward, how it affects me now, you know, how it's changed the way I see my life now is I, I, I've devoted myself to my creative pursuits, the things that I enjoy, making videos and for YouTube and lockpicking and cubing and making a lot of music and doing things like that. But I've also been giving myself permission to just, not do a damn thing. Just sit in front of the TV and watch my favorite YouTube creators or watch whatever show I'm currently binging that's a special interest or whatever, or at least a hyper focus at the moment. It's just giving myself permission to let my brain work the way it does and therefore let my life flow the way it does instead of trying to force it into this hard routine that I had to strictly follow in order to get up in the morning, get to work and then come home and then do, so anyways, yeah, it's changed a lot. And like I said, it's just this jumble of emotions, some good, some bad. And some of it's just a lot of regret. I just wish things had been different. I wish I had known her sooner. I wish I had known as a child, because so many of the conflicts that I had with parents and with teachers and other adults, are directly tied to the way my brain works. And they didn't know. Autism wasn't a diagnosis when I was a child. It didn't become a diagnosis until like the 80s, I think. And, I was born in 1972. So, I was diagnosed with learning disabilities, but that, which is a whole separate thing because learning disabilities are often comorbid with autism. But anyhow, a lot of regret, a lot less stress and a lot more peace now. I still carry a lot of anxiety that's often related to autistic struggles, but being at a place where I can give myself accommodations and I can forgive myself for when I need to shut down or, it's made my life easier. I do wish it had gone differently though. There's so many things that I could have, would have, should have done that I would like to have done with my life and during my life that honestly I didn't have the opportunity to.
And I think that's a really valid outlook. You brought up a lot of important points, like how you weren't, while you were focusing on your career, how you weren't able to focus on the things that brought you joy, your special interests, but then also relationships, because working in a traditional role was so demanding and required so much output. And in these conversations that I've had with other people, that's this common theme of getting burnt out in a field because we naturally want to spend time on our special interests, the things that bring us joy. But in order to be successful within certain work structures, it's almost easier in a way to mask and just like put your head down and like do the job.
Exactly. And like, one of my greatest struggles in school was the way that school is organized, like the way school curriculums are organized into units, and you're in class, and for 1 week you're studying this unit, for the next week you're studying this unit, or you're moving And I would get so frustrated because just when I was starting to get interested in something and wanting to dive so deep into it, we're moving on to the next era of history or a different culture or a different civilization or a different writing style or whatever it is, and that's actually why, like, my undergrad, I have a triple major in creative writing, literary studies, and comparative religions. I had a minor, unfinished minor in psychology and an unfinished minor in dance. And they were unfinished because I graduated early because I got so tired of the paradigm of school. Like, just when something was starting to get interesting, we would have to move on to the next section, to the next unit, to the next topic. And I was just so fed up that I just ended up just taking a whole boatload of classes at a time for like 3 semesters just so I could graduate early and be done with it. Because of that, I often, like, autistic brains are often very good for research type of positions, or activities. And because of that ability to hyper focus on one thing and really squeeze every bit of juice out of it, right? And school, even higher ed, even at the undergrad level, it changes a bit at the graduate level. I have an MFA also, but at the graduate level, and leading into that, it's all about. Well, I have a whole rant about education that, especially the way public education is designed. It's designed to produce good workers. It's not designed to produce good thinkers, right? And that's because of the corporate the meddling of people like J.D. Rockefeller, who literally, well, he's apocryphally quoted as saying that I want a nation of workers, not a nation of thinkers, right? And he invested so much money into the public school system to help make that a reality. So you should be able to read well enough to do a job, write well enough to do a job, math well enough to do a job, but that's it. No critical thinking, no analytical thinking, none of those deep, certainly not the arts, right? So, because the arts are the purview of the rich and the privileged.
And those deep thinking, that deep research, I think that's where so many autistic people thrive. Like, it really helps that monotropic attention style where we
Absolutely.
love a good deep dive. And so that's why the traditional model of school can almost be traumatizing for autistic individuals because you will get really into something and then, oh, we're transitioning to the next subject. And in the work that I did in education, I helping with the meltdowns and the emotional regulation because my students would have a really hard time with that frustrate or with those transitions. And it wasn't until I was self-diagnosed later and realized, oh, this is why I also struggled in school. This is why I also was getting frustrated. And then how that almost applied to my career as well. And so when we have talked about your career and how you have moved from these different positions, I wondered if you were pursuing that monotropic attention style where you kind of pick an area of hyper focus and then decide to pivot.
In terms of, yes, during my career, during my IT career, at first it started out as I need to pay rent, right? What are my marketable job skills? I have a degree in writing, literature, and religions. What is that good for? And I don't want to go back from where I was so fed up with school, like I said, that I didn't want to go. My original plan in life was to go on to grad school, become a professor, blah, blah, blah. One of my original plans. I've had many plans for my life. including a full military career. That one was weird, but anyways. But I was so fed up with school at that point that was now off the table. Going on to grad school and becoming a professor, that was no longer feasible because of where I was at mentally and emotionally. So my only other marketable job skill is that I could take apart a computer and put it back together again, because my adoptive older brother, he's one of those people who like never took an electronics class in his life, never took a mechanical engineering class in his life. He was also horrible at school, but for ADHD reasons. But if he could touch something, he could understand it. And I remember we'd found old. Remember, this is like the 70s. We'd found an old black and white, like 12-inch TV in a garbage can, and we brought it home, and he took it apart, and he'd never, like, I guess he would have been 11, 12, maybe 13. I don't know. We were pretty young. He'd never taken an electronics class, but we took it apart. And then he started looking at different things, and he went and got the soldering iron, our adoptive father's soldering iron from the basement. And he started resoldering things and doing stuff. And all of a sudden the TV worked, right? It was a working TV. And it was like, and he'd never taken an electronics class in his life. And I had always been fascinated by his ability to touch something and understand it. Whereas I dive in and I do research upon research upon research, and I read books and I read reference manuals and I read, to get to that same level of understanding. But I had a roommate in high school. I was not a good. I had a lot of trouble as a young adult, and I got sent to military school. And I had a roommate in high school who had one of the early IBM PCs. The thing was huge, took up the entire desk, and had a monitor like that big. And when he wasn't around, I would take his computer apart and put it back together again. And then in college, my undergrad, because I could take apart a computer and put it back together again, I started, I had a work-study job maintaining the computers in the library, and then also working for the computer assistance department, I guess. Anyways, I had a work-study job just basically doing computer stuff, and so I was able to teach myself some more, and this was late 80s, early 90s. So this was early 90s when I was in college doing my undergrad. So and so it was right at the initial cutting edge of the internet. And so learning those skills and everything, and then graduating, I actually was, that was my only other marketable job skill, was that I understood computers, not from a coding perspective, but from an infrastructure technology point of view. I understood computers. So because that was my only other marketable job skill other than my useless degree, I started looking for IT jobs, and I landed a help desk job. And then throughout my career, though, I slowly started to specialize more and more in project management, because, being able to maintain a project that has all these different moving parts, and being able to structure it and organize it and understand the dependencies and the interdependencies, because that's one of the things that the autistic brain is really good at, is seeing how things connect and interconnect, and transferable skill sets and transferable knowledge, and how this interacts with that, and if you pull on this thread, it's going to move that pulley over there, and blah blah blah. So the autistic mindset there. But then I became, in terms of the monotropism, I started to specialize in agile methodologies, because the old traditional project management methodology where you spend eons gathering requirements, and then you spend eons designing it, then you spend eons building it, then you spend eons testing it, and then you finally release it to the public or whatever. That model actually came from the construction project management methodology, where you have to be able to plan sequentially. You have to have the blueprints first, and then before you put up the drywall, you have to run all the plumbing and all the electrical, because once you put up the drywall, you can't access those infrastructure type of things, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where that traditional project management methodology came from, because when computer science first became a thing, there was no methodology for running a computer project. So they borrowed the most highly developed one that was out there, and that was the construction methodology. But agile methodologies are actually better suited for the very rapid type of software development that the modern world needs. And so I became so laser focused on that, and I became an expert on agile methodologies, and I became an expert at how to wind agile concepts into traditional project methodologies, even when, if a company, especially large corporations, they're very loath to move away from what's worked in the past. And when they do turn, it's like turning a battleship as opposed to turning a motorboat, right? It takes a long time for them to change direction. So, but even in situations like that, because of the way my brain works and the way I could see all the interdependencies and all the intricacies, I could mold some agile concepts into the traditional methodology. And then I started creating new methodologies by blending things like that and calling them, instead of a waterfall methodology where one step falls after the next step, after the next step, after the next step, it would be like a water scrum or a scrummer fall methodology, where I'm bringing in the Scrum Agile methodology mindset into the traditional waterfall project management, and then by doing that, helping organizations transition from that very stodgy traditional way of developing software into the modern world, where software has to keep up with user needs at a very rapid pace. So that whole monotropic thinking and being able to also transfer skill sets, because I know something very well over here, means that I'm able to pick it up, recognize the patterns over here, and see how pieces of this can fit here as well. So having those two autistic gifts, that deep dive monotropic, singular focus on a single topic, having that, as well as being able to then translate or transfer those skills or that knowledge into other arenas, that's really what made my career. Especially as I was starting to rise very quickly in my 30s, where once I got past all the entry level crap and I got into like project management and middle management type of stuff, that's where my career really started to take off, because I could combine those two things.
So you had talked about letting go of traditional ideas of success, and how, traditionally you would climb the career ladder, and how you want to let go of these traditional ideas of success. So what I want to know is, how has your definition of success evolved over time, and what feels meaningful to you now?
So I really, because it was all that I knew, I really had bought into that whole climb the corporate ladder, be a leader, blah, mode of success. Make more money. Money is success. That type of that type of a thing. And I really, man, I really bought that story. I really bought that line of BS, hook, line, and sinker. And I burned myself out, and I wasted, my entire adult working life chasing that dream. And yes, it did provide for some really nice things. And, I have all these musical instruments and this big fancy computer set up and multiple monitors and professional lighting and a professional camera and blah, 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 right? I have all of these things, but at what cost? I mean, to me, if I could go back and look at it again, success would have looked like being able to make a good living or a healthy living, while still being able to enjoy all the other aspects of life. By not jeopardizing my marriage, which is maybe the most important thing to me, not jeopardizing that by being so burnt out I couldn't pay attention to the one person who mattered most to me. I just didn't have the emotional capacity or the physical energy, the physical capacity to pay that attention. To me, a successful life looks like a happy life, where you actually have not just moments of joy, because in that time frame, there were moments of pure joy, right? My wedding was one. Our honeymoon in Ireland was another. That entire trip was just like I don't even need a photo album, or snapshots from it. Like my entire brain is snapshots of it. Like I see moments from, so I had moments of joy, but what I was lacking was, so instead of it being this spiky graph where my baseline is way down here in the basement and then it spikes up and then it drops back down to this, instead, it would have been nice if instead of being the baseline being burnt out and miserable, if the baseline were happy, because there's a difference between happiness and joy, right? Happiness is this thing, this sustainable thing, and joy are these moments, right? And so a sustainable baseline here being happy with those spikes of joy, and yeah, there's going to be some rough times and you're going to dip down a little bit, but the baseline is here. Instead, I spent my entire adult working life with my baseline down here in the basement, occasionally peaking up into happiness, occasionally peaking up into joy, but always dropping back down to burnt out, tired, sick, physically, emotionally, mentally drained, exhausted. I had a rough childhood. So my adoptive father was an alcoholic and he was abusive, physically, verbally, emotionally. So I had a rough start in life. My wife, not to tell too many stories on her, also had a rough start in life. She grew up in poverty. Like she grew up in a 4-room house that had a single like coal burning stove for heat, right? But she talks about her childhood and she was happy. She and her cousins and her sisters, yeah, they were poor. They didn't have anything materially. But they had fun and they had love and they had song and they had laughter and I look at my childhood and I struggle to bring up a single happy moment or like a single happy memory. I really struggle hard to bring up a really happy especially a baseline happiness. I struggle. My earliest memory is being angry at other children in a sandbox when I was like 3 years old. That's my earliest memory. I was angry with those children because somebody had, read Treasure Island to me or something, or a picture book of Treasure Island or something. I had this idea of pirates in my head. And this is a very weird first memory. Or maybe not so much for autistic folks, but and so I had this idea in my head, but it didn't make sense to me why, if their treasure was so valuable, why they would bury it and throw dirt on it and get it dirty, because I always got in trouble for getting my nice things dirty, right? Getting clothes dirty or whatever. So why, if it meant so much, if it's so important, why would you get it dirty? So I decided that they must dig straight down and then dig out a little alcove to the side, put their treasure there, and then fill up the main hole with dirt, but their treasure wouldn't get dirt on it because it's off in this little alcove to the side, right? So it was a Montessori preschool, and one of the projects that the kids could do was you could dig in the sandbox, dig a design in the sandbox or whatever, and they would fill it with plaster, and then when it hardened, you can glue sparklies to it and all that kind of stuff. So I decided I was going to dig straight down, scoop out a little hole, they would fill it with plaster, and then when I had that, I would glue sparklies to the part that was sticking out, the little alcove sticking out. I would glue sparklies to that to show where the treasure was. So I was 3 or 4 years old, doing serious research into pirate treasure, right? Serious, hardcore research, like physical experimentation on pirate treasure holes. And the other kids were in the sandbox playing, and they kept caving in my damn hole. And I was so angry at them. And that's my earliest memory in life, right? And aside from that, then my home life wasn't great, at all. And even when my adoptive mother finally kicked my adoptive father out of the house, and they got divorced and everything, even then, things were not great. And so I don't have that happy childhood memory that so many people have, where I was happy as a child and blah, blah. And so anyways, we're talking about redefining success. And so redefining success, I'm long-winded and tangential. I'm all over the place. So redefining success to me would be finding a way to maintain that base level happiness so that you can enjoy the moments of joy and so that you can experience the hard times, the moments of sadness, depression, or whatever, but knowing that you're always going to return to that baseline of joy, or of happiness rather, that baseline happiness. That's what success would look like to me. And that is not what my adult life looked like. My adult life looked like constant burnout and shutdown, constantly down here, constant anxiety, constant worrying, constant inertia, just not being able to move, not be able to do things, not be able to do the things I wanted to do. And so perhaps if instead of pursuing the highest paying thing I could think of at the time, which was IT, instead of pursuing that, if I instead pursued music, because I'm a musician, and I'm not a good enough musician that I'm going to be a pop star or rock star or anything like that, but I could have worked in the music industry. I have, with my technical mindset that worked so well in IT, I could have applied that same technical mindset to audio engineering and had a good career maybe as, a front of house engineer or a recording engineer. I do a lot of recording here in my little home studio. And so I could have been a recording engineer, or maybe I could have taught music. I love music theory and I love teaching music theory. That's, my friend who I referenced earlier, who's the psychologist who pointed me in the autism direction, That's actually how we became friends. It was online in music forums because I was explaining and I would make little tutorials about music theory or whatever. And we just started talking about how music works and why it works that way. And I love teaching. So maybe teaching music, maybe teaching music theory, maybe teaching guitar, maybe teaching whatever. There's so many things there are ways I think that my life could have been baseline happy. And that I could have lived there instead of living in a constant state of burnout. And that's, I think, if I could go back and, slap my 20-year-old self upside the head and be like, look, dude, don't do that. Don't hurt yourself. Don't burn all this energy masking and trying to appear more normal so that you can rise in the corporate ranks and so you can so you can chase this hierarchical ladder that means nothing. At the end of the day, I'm a retired 53-year-old Blasian man who just sits around doing my hobbies all day now. Right? That would have been true. That would be true if, I'd done anything else. I'd still be this. So why not have spent all those years doing something that allowed that baseline happiness? So I could experience the joy, so I could experience the hard parts and know always that even if that joy wears off, I'm still going to be happy. I know I'm going to work my way out of this depression and be happy because that's my baseline. So that to me is what success would be.
And I think that incorporating things that make you happy is such a like powerful thing for everyone to apply to their life, especially when you are autistic. You have your special interests because it can be easy to pour all of your energy into survival. And when you come from a difficult childhood, you are in that survival state. And so your focus becomes, okay, I got to survive. I got to get a high paying job. I need to get out of the situation I'm in. And so sometimes happiness can be at the back burner. And as you were sharing a lot of things, including talking about your childhood, I relate so much to it because a lot of my memories also were tainted by anger and not always remembering the good things because there were emotional memories that stood out more. And so I'm glad that you gave that piece of advice because do you think that if you were to just pursue the same career again, knowing what you know now, like would there be a certain path that you would follow? Or maybe a better way to frame this would be, what advice would you give to somebody who is pursuing a path in IT or engineering so
You
that
know that
they burn out?
that's actually a really great question because yes, they're actually knowing what I know now, there would have been a path through that corporate career that didn't result in the amount of burnout and everything that I experienced. And so if I were to talk to a young person, I would say that just ignore the climbing the corporate ladder BS. Ignore that entire that's not what's important. That's ego, right? And it's ego that's taught to you. We aren't taught that from the beginning. I mean, we don't start out in the world thinking like that. It's well, at least I don't think we do. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. I'm not a developmental psych type of person. I got so caught up in the trappings of that corporate success and what it means. If instead I had just been happy, building and leading project teams, being a project manager, being the best project manager that I could be, just had been happy doing that my entire career, I probably would have been fine. But instead, I was trying to, always level up and always reach that next rung and chasing that. And one of the things that I love most about my career was how many times I was told that I was a great coach, mentor, leader, teacher. And I taught leadership classes and stuff like that. But I had people who had I'd hired or who'd been on one of my teams, project teams or whatever, come and tell me that I was the best leader that they ever had, because I listened or I coached or I tried to help them grow their careers more than, and so I could have found ways to do. And like I said earlier, I love teaching. And so I could have maybe found fulfillment, not putting in 60, 70, 80-hour weeks on as par for the course, right? Throughout my career, I probably averaged 60, 70 hours a week. That was probably my average, was around in that range. And that's just not healthy. That's instead of doing that, I could have, done my 9 to 5, my 40 hours, and then maybe on the weekends taught a class or two or something like that. Just there are possibilities, there are paths, and like I could have just been a project manager, been a good one, and that be it. That not because just doing that and not constantly having the high pressure, high stakes, everything, trying to, instead of doing that, that would have left time for music. That would have left time and energy, maybe, right? And, the biggest thing, it would have been also, another big thing would have been the masking. I didn't have to go to every after work event. I don't.
Maybe that would be part of the advice too about limiting your social interactions because you know that your battery is limited. So then you do have time to pour into the relationships that well, not that work relationships don't matter, but you had shared with your wife how it took a toll on that relationship.
Exactly. And that's exactly, and like that, it got so bad that like I had literally had little, I found like places in our building where I could like literally go and hide to be by myself so nobody would talk to me. So I could either work by myself, bring my laptop with me and work by myself, hidden away in some little nook or cranny somewhere, or I would literally go and sit in those little nooks and crannies and stare at a wall. I would just literally just shut down for a while.
Was your environment normally very stimulating where people were constantly coming and interrupting you?
Yes.
Okay.
And because part of it is like, in a lot of the corporate America, you're working in a cubicle farm, right? It's just row upon row of cubicles. And then the last company that I worked for, they decided that they're going to go for this open floor plan where it's going to be entirely collaborative and there's not going to be any cubicle walls and it's only going to be low walls and everybody's sitting at the same level and you're going to be sitting in these little pods, these little pod areas, and there's going to be no barriers and blah, 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 blah. And what that meant was you heard, and as an autistic person, right, one of the things, like in grade school science class, in grade school biology, they did this experiment, where, you know, they would pass around these little vials with like scents, like lavender or whatever. And you had to sit there and hold it. And then you had to time how long it took for olfactory fatigue to kick in where you weren't smelling it anymore. Olfactory fatigue, I don't have olfactory fatigue. And I think a lot of autistic people either don't have olfactory fatigue, or it takes longer for it to kick in. Like if you look at like high resolution scans of autistic brains, they're just lit the hell up. They're taking in and processing so much more sensory data than than a neurotypical brain does. Like I think it's something like 40% more sensory data is being brought in and processed by the autistic brain. And so that experiment, you're sitting there smelling the lavender, and I'm like, Mr. Cole, I still smell it. And he's like, that's not, you're making that up, blah, 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 blah. They didn't believe me. Everybody has olfactory fatigue. Olfactory fatigue is a human thing. I'm like, no, I literally still smell it. And so when you're in these open floor plan environments in corporate America, you hear everything. You're smelling everything, and you have the fluorescent lights, and you have everybody's desk lamp, and you have every person walking behind you and walking past you, and you're smelling like the person who put on too much Axe body spray because they're a 22-year-old dude bro, and the woman who doused herself in Chanel number 5, and you have everything in between. You have and the dude who's wearing the Axe body spray also used Old Spice aftershave, and so you have conflicting, so it's just this sensory overload, this sensory overwhelm that I didn't realize that I was having to navigate, and that's part of why I was so burnt out and fried all the time, because I had to devote mental and emotional energy to try to shut those things out. Even with earbuds in and everything, now I have my music added to the sensory cacophony, right? And so, I mean, it was a little bit better when it was all cubicles. At least you had a 5-foot cubicle wall blocking you off from everybody else, but you could still hear, and you could still. So it's just and then on top of that, there is also what is the right amount of socializing at work. And I devoted extra time becoming knowledgeable about football, so I could talk football with the guys at lunch. And I devoted extra time, learning about cars, because a lot of them were car guys, and about, you're doing all of these extra things, and I didn't need to. You don't need to do those extra things. And you can advocate for yourself. And if it is an open floor plan, you can advocate for yourself and say, you know what? I need a way to shut out all this noise because I'm autistic. I'm overstimulated, way, way, way overstimulated by all of this. You can ask for accommodations of having a low scent or no scent part of the floor that you can go to, so you can go and work over there where it is literally marked off as low scent or no scent, or whatever the case may be. There's, even if I had chosen to pursue that career, an IT career, chosen not to focus on the hierarchy, climbing the hierarchical ladder, if I had been aware enough and bold enough to advocate for myself, and if I had just simply walked out the door at 5 o'clock every day and just said, you know what? It's not worth my mental health. It's not worth my marital health. It's not worth my physical health. There were times when I called in because sick when I wasn't, just because I dreaded going into the office. Right. Advocated for myself in terms of asking for, work from home privileges or whatever the case may be. There's so many ways, like so many strategies like that, where asking for the accommodations that you need and really working those into your daily life and paying attention to your social battery, paying attention to your emotional battery, paying attention to your mental battery and your physical battery. Right? All of those things, those are different things, right? I might be physically capable to keep on working, but I can't do the socializing today because my social battery is drained. My emotional battery, I may be an emotional mess because of something that happened, and that is going to affect my ability to focus or do this or that, or to be around other people, and people are going to be sympathetic or not sympathetic or blah, blah, blah. I'll have to explain why I'm upset or not. So these are all different things that if I had been aware of, I could potentially have done a better job of managing and advocating for myself with regard to those things, to establish that baseline that I'm going to be happy. Damn it. That's my priority. Maintaining this happy baseline, that is my priority. That is what I'm going to I don't care about corporate profits as much as I care about being happy. I don't care about the next promotion as much as I care about being happy. I don't care about et cetera, et cetera. Focusing here on that success story. That success story should have been the most important thing to me.
And that work-life balance too.
And we talk about work-life balance and stuff like that. It's so funny. The last company I worked for, they talk
work-life balance.
The last company I worked for, they changed from, they warped. It's so subversive. They said, your work-life balance is of utmost importance, and so therefore, you should find ways to bring yourself to work, to bring your life into your work. And so they would offer yoga classes that you could go to in the middle of the day or whatever like that. So they're basically, what you're saying is, instead of a work-life balance, you want it to be work-work balance. You want my life to be work. You want me to live here in this building. You want to bring in, they brought in massage therapists, like literally massage therapist. You can get like a 20-minute chair massage in the middle of the day or whatever to help enhance your work-life balance. And it's like, no, you're actually doing the opposite of what a work-life balance is. There's my work and then there's my life, right? And that, like, being able to understand, and a lot of corporations pull crap like that. They'll start a wellness program, but the goal of the wellness program is literally to cut your health benefits, because the healthier you are, the less insurance you'll need, the less insurance they need to provide, blah, 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 blah. It's like instead of saying, nope, I care about your health, you're going to work 9 to 5 period. That's best for your physical and mental health. Instead, they're saying, no, we're going to put a gym on campus. That's the health benefit. That's a health benefit. We're going to put a gym. And it's so subversive that they're subverting these really good things. Work-life balance, physical health, emotional health, blah, blah, blah. They're subverting all of these things as ways to keep you on campus, in the building, longer. So you spend more of your life at work. as opposed to having a work and a life balance. Instead of having that, it's just bring your life to work with you so you can work, you can be here longer, work harder, be more productive, put in more hours.
It's good to know that corporations will use tactics like that to blur the boundaries of your life and make it seem like, oh, we're providing you this great benefit, but then you find yourself being at work longer than ever. And my mom would call it the golden handcuffs, like the benefits that would keep you connected to a job, even though it sacrifice like you had to sacrifice your well-being, where other people that I've talked to too have said I would have rather taken a low-paying job, especially retired people, a low-paying job that would have allowed me to have a life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Your mother's exactly right, and it is golden handcuffs, right? And that's also how I used to actually call my salary golden handcuffs, because I was like, how are we going to live without my salary? And then I retired early. And I was like, oh, that's how. You figure out how to live within the budget you have. Poor people have been doing it forever. Just because I have a six-figure plus salary doesn't mean that I can't figure out how to live on, half of it. It's my adoptive sister went from being a lawyer at one of the largest law firms in Chicago to working for the Gates Foundation, right, doing charitable type of stuff, and she would complain about how she had to take, like, I forget what she said, 50% pay cut. I was like, half of a crap ton is still a crap ton. So just because you went from, anyways, so the way that when I did think of my salary as golden handcuffs, and I did think of, all of those things as, how will we live without this, blah, blah. And the answer, and when I walked away from the corporate world and retired early, the answer is that's how we're going to live with it, right? That we have a different budget, and so now we do different things. And that's, and I know, I'm not naive. I know that in today's economy, that's harder to say, because the wealth gap has gotten so bad and the cost of living has gotten so high and everything else. So I know that it's like, once upon a long time ago, like 50s, 60s, in the 50s, a single income household working just a blue collar job would afford you, a nice home, not an extravagant one, but a nice home, a car, maybe two cars, and you could raise your 2.5 kids, on, your average blue collar wages, and and that's not possible today, right? That same cost of living, that same level of living is not possible today. So I know that part of what I'm saying is coming from a place of privilege, that, I grew up with the economic internet boom, right? That's when I grew up, and that's when I was working, and that's when they were throwing money at us, and that Y2K and all that kind of stuff meant that we just got paid so much more than we were worth. So I know that I have privilege, that I'm coming from a place of privilege there. But I'm saying that if I could go back, I would give up some of that privilege. I absolutely should have given up some of that privilege in order to have had that baseline happiness.